Test, test.
Haven't been called by the mayor, have you?
No, why?
Saying, oh, my.
Saying what?
Remember Greg's question?
Yeah, Don told me that Don knew exactly it would be ugly because they're using it everywhere. Yeah. Not your first rodeo with
Well, everybody's
that,
running
is
for
it?
office. They're all using, but they're cutting their nose off. What are they using? The fact that they have to.
That we even talk, yeah, that we talk
Anybody
about it
running for office over
everywhere.
Well, it takes four of us to vote for it, so they'll never.
Move along.
there. But it's also never gonna pass. You don't say they need it.
They don't say they need it.
Yeah, we're supposed to, we've got our meeting Thursday, right? Well, how was your St. Johns County?
It was good. We did St. John's County. It was nice. Good trip out to
Did they
the,
do the NAS Jacks?
that's next month.
Mike's on, Daisy.
I know, I just turned it on.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get today's proceedings going. This is Flagler County Board of County Commissioners Workshop for Monday, June 3rd, 2024. It is 1 o'clock p.m. If everybody could please stand and join me in the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
At this time, we take a moment of silence for individual prayer, reflection, or meditation. We take this time to honor and remember our first responders and the men and women in our military who keep us safe and protect our freedoms at home and abroad. All righty. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Appreciate it. Want to welcome everybody to today's workshop. First discussion item is going to be our beach renourishment funding study. And Ashley, Ms. Petito, are we ready? Ainsley, sorry about that.
Ainsley.
Ainsley Renke, Coastal Engineering Administrator for Flagler County.
Thank you.
Yes. So I am here to give you an overview of where we are in the beach management plan, and then we'll go into the funding study and some survey results. And we have our consultant here today to present that. Okay, so as you guys are aware, here's some history and background of the beach management plan. In November 2019, the Board of County Commissioners established a consensus to develop a long-term comprehensive beach management plan for Flagler County. 2021, the beach management study was commissioned, and it was to identify all the needs and goals and the implementation requirements for this beach management plan. And October 16th is the beach management plan was implemented at a regular board meeting. This is an overview of our working plan right now, showing the 18 miles of Flagler County coastline. And if you look along the coastline, starting at the south, you can see at the Volusia County line, the secant wall there is being constructed. from Volusia County up to Gamble Rogers Park. Then we have what we're calling Phase 1 in our working plan. That's the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers project. Sorry about that. I don't know why that, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers project, and you can see that the R monuments are listed there, but it's basically from Gamble Rogers Park all the way up to 7th Street and north of the pier. And that includes the Army Corps federal portion and the non-federal tapers on either end. Next, we have what we're calling Phase 2. This will also be a dredge project, very similar to the Army Corps of Engineers project. We are looking to modify our permit that we have to extend this dredge project from 7th Street North in the city of Flagler Beach all the way to Varn Park. We believe that our permit, we'll have our permit by the end of this year or early 2025, and we want to get started on construction as soon as possible. Now, north of there, you can see we've got what we're calling Phase 3. So Varn Park all the way up to Washington Oaks State Park would be Phase 3. This is where we have the hard bottom impacts that need to be studied, and we are working through that right now. We hope to implement a project there in 2026. And north of Washington Oaks State Park, we're calling that Phase 4, and we anticipate doing more truck haul projects as needed to restore the dune.
Ainsley, are you saying that we have resolved the hard bottom issue as far north as Varn Park?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so I just want to go through this a little quickly here, but this is just showing this coastline as we're moving forward through the FDOT secant wall. Phase 1 is the Army Corps project of 4.3 miles. Phase 2 is 5.8 miles. And so we hope to have over 9 miles or half of Flagler County's coastline renourished with a dredge project by next summer. And Phase 3, you can see the link there from R47 to R14. We are currently working or moving forward to hire a consulting firm for the permitting and design of this next phase. And then Phase 4, dune restoration will be done as needed. So just reiterating these, everything's being controlled by permits at this point. This picture is from St. Johns County in Volano Beach, and this is showing the beach before they had their initial Army Corps of Engineers project. So a dredge project that's very similar to what we want to do in over 9 miles of Flagler County. And you can see the yellow arrow there is pointing to a staircase going down to an exposed seawall. And there's people standing on the beach for scale. So this is going to be similar to what we're seeing here in areas like Painter's Hill. And after the construction, you can see none of the seawalls are exposed anymore. You have a big dune sloping down to a nice wide beach. This is an example of the type of beach nourishment projects that we would be talking about today. We won't be talking about dune restoration for most of our county. This is a beach restoration. It's very different. Another view of this same project is standing on the beach. This is in front of the Reef Restaurant. You all might be familiar with the Reef Restaurant at Volano Beach. Those are people standing there, large area of seawall exposed, and a very low beach area. And then after construction of a dredge project where they've raised the beach and created a nice wide berm. One more example was Jacksonville Beach. You can see this is where they had built a seawall decades before, and in front of the seawall, they have lost their beach. This happens in front of seawalls over time. Now you can see where that yellow marking is along the seawall. I want to show you what it looks like after they implemented their beach management project. And so this was after renourishing their beach on their given interval, and they've built out their dune system and maintain a nice wide beach. So this is an example. This is a Jacksonville Beach where they have a successful project. Okay, so one of the things we're going to be talking about today is local funding. Local funding is a requirement to receive state and federal cost sharing for beach nourishment. Olson Associates has worked with us closely, and they've identified our needs and come up with an equivalent annual cost for renourishing and maintaining the 18 miles of beaches in Flagler County. We've also worked with a consultant group called Public Financial Management Group, and they were hired to conduct a funding study to test the community's interest in the program and their willingness to pay for a program like this. And so PFM Group has worked with us closely in the engineering department and with Olson Associates to analyze and determine a recommendation for sustainable funding to rebuild and maintain the beaches. And the purpose today is to review the survey results and to initiate some discussion with you guys on the board about their recommendation for a dedicated funding source for beach management. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce our consultant, Stan Gerberer from PFM, here to present his analysis and results.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks. Thank you, Ansley. Stan Gerberer with PFM out of Orlando, Florida. So we met with you a couple of years ago, talked about the beach funding study. And the question was at the time, how do we create a funding mechanism to fund the beach management plan? The concern at the time was, well, nobody really wants to pay for it. And so we proposed to do a survey at the public level of determining the value that is attributed to properties within Flagler County, and then examine the alternatives as to whether or not we could develop an assessment, a special assessment or an ad valorem assessment across all properties in Flagler County to help fund the beach management plan. Because the beach management plan is funded by both federal and state monies, unless Flagler County also contributes money, you can't do the project. You don't qualify for federal and state monies unless there's a local funding source. So in order to fully implement the beach management plan, we have to develop local funding source. So county asked us, can we impose an MSTU, municipal services taxing unit, which would be done with ad valorem tax revenues, or can we create a special assessment through an MSBU, municipal services benefit unit? And so we examined both the MSTU alternative and the MSBU alternative. We also implemented a study, a survey countywide. So we had a survey company. We were in the field from mid-February of 2024 through early March of 2024 to survey all households in Flagler County. We sent out, and that was done via text and then also via access to the web. So people could voluntarily click on the web and fill out the survey, or they would receive a text message. And we sent out 30,000 initial texts, and then we retexted people over the course of the following few weeks. So that's what we've been doing. That's the project overview and approach. So we determined the cost based on the master plan. We had the components in order to describe the benefits that are required to illustrate and support the imposition of the levy of a special assessment. We have to examine the benefit to those properties. And those benefits include protection itself, the physical protection by renourishing the beach. Also the value to those properties for the use and enjoyment, for people to have access, and for the value improvement to those properties where those properties have access to use and enjoyment. And then environmental preservation, which enhances property values as well. We examined public awareness and funding support. You'll recall in those first conversations that we had, we suggested that we hire a public relations firm to communicate to the public what the beach management plan is. Otherwise, if you just ask people, how much do you want to pay for something? They're not willing to pay for anything because they don't really understand what we're doing. So in between that time when we first met with you and when we implemented the survey, we developed, and county staff throughout the process has been really helpful and really professional, and developed a web page which communicated the beach management plan to the public and helped make that information available so that people were kind of up to speed on what we were trying to do. And then we conducted the survey. We compared the MSTU and the MSBU funding alternatives. We looked at other funding alternatives with county administration and county finance director as far as what other alternative revenue sources might be available to supplement an MSTU or an MSBU. So we looked at those funding sources. We developed a MSBU recommendation. So we're recommending the MSBU over the MSTU. So the special assessments as opposed to an ad valorem assessment. And then proposing, based on the survey results, proposing a zone structure throughout the county. And then we have preliminary special assessment alternatives. It's not a final tax roll. It's not the final amounts yet. Still some details to be worked out, but basically a workable approach and an alternative that we can start developing actual assessments. So the zones, after doing the survey, as I said, we sent out 30,000 texts. We had another 300 to 500 survey responses from the website. We got over 3,000 responses in Flagler County. I think it's about 2 to 3% of the entire county population responded voluntarily to the survey. It's a very significant level of response. So there was a lot of interest, a lot of response. Over 3,300 surveys were filled out and completed. Within the survey responses, there were some natural breaks in terms of when you examine the survey responses by geography. So for each survey response that we had a point location, and we were able to group them into zones. And so the natural breaks in the zones that we found were on the Barrier Island, that's zone 1. Zone 2 is from the Intercoastal Waterway west to I-95. Zone 3 west of I-95 to US 1. And then zone 4 is everything west of US 1. And those were kind of the natural breaks that we found in the survey data itself. The project costs, estimated annual or equivalent annual cost is estimated to be from $9 to $10 million a year. That effectively represents the benefit to the public. So when the government spends these dollars, they don't profit from it. They're just delivering a service. And that service has been legally defined as the benefit received by all of those properties in the county. So the benefit to the project, to Flagler County residents, is estimated to be around $9 to $10 million a year. It's equivalent to the cost. The county's share of those monies, is estimated today to be between $6 and $7 million per year, including expanded cost sharing. And the reason for the project, again, is that the beaches are critically eroded. We have significant infrastructure failures. Lots of people are familiar with A1A falling into the ocean. And the expectation is the effects of storms and sea level rise is accelerating and creating a worsening trend over time. So the project is imperative. As we mentioned, the state of Florida, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers require cost sharing from Flagler County. So without this local source, the beach management plan and project construction is not possible. So let's talk a little bit about the survey response, and I'll stop here and ask if you had any questions before we get into the actual survey data.
I just have one. When you say county there, that's the whole county, including Palm Coast. You're not separating out the unincorporated from Palm Coast.
Correct. Countywide includes all the municipalities, Bunnell, City of Flagler Beach, and Palm Coast.
It would be helpful to see the number of responses from each one of those zones.
I think we have that.
Okay.
Well, I may not have that. I have that in the draft report, but I don't think I have it here with me today. But we have that data, and we'll make that available to you. So the first question that we asked, are you aware of recent beach erosion that's resulted in roadway failures along A1A that has threatened homes and reduced accessibility of the beach for recreational use? Over 95% of respondents reported being aware of threatening conditions. And so when you look at that by zone, the awareness of the beach erosion and awareness of beach conditions very, very high. And then we asked them, are you aware that we hired an engineering firm to do a beach management plan? Pretty high awareness countywide as well. Over 80% of the people on the barrier island indicated they were aware of that. And close to about 2/3 of the rest of the county was aware. So pretty high awareness of beach management plan and very high awareness of the problems on the beach.
I'm assuming your bottom reference there for source of Hendry County is just a
Yes.
carry
sorry.
forward problem.
Yes, that's a footnote problem. Apologies for that. When we asked about the use and enjoyment, on a scale of 1 to 5, from not important to very important, how important is the beach to you? Over 85% of respondents countywide reported the beach was either important or very important to them. Very, very small percentages say that the beach is either not important or only slightly important. What's interesting is you start to see a scaling by these zones where the importance and the awareness of the beach is very, very high on the barrier island, and it kind of drops off as you go further west, which is intuitive. Pretty much everybody figures, the further you are away from the beach, the less important it is, the less frequently you go, and the less value you place on it. And that generally plays out to be true. The survey data was a little bit different with respect to the very far west, Zone 4, when they were actually slightly more involved and used the beach slightly more than Zone 3. That's probably just survey sample error. We had only around 100 or so responses in all of the western zone, so those data are not as robust as Zone 3. I think it's safe to say that Zone 3 and Zone 4 are very, very similar in terms of activity and use and enjoyment. And then in terms of willingness to pay, they were a little bit less willing to pay. And so it was very consistent with the idea that from the shoreline, the further west you go, the less commitment and the less interest and the less value is placed on the beach. And that gives us a basis for which to scale potential assessments countywide over time. And I think it's sort of a natural conclusion. The people on the beach ought to pay more than the people very far out west. And in fact, that's how the survey respondents replied, that the people on the beach generally willing to pay more than the people further west. In terms of use and enjoyment, have you been to the beach in the past year? Over 90% of respondents report visiting the beach. Like everybody goes. Everybody uses the beach. Beach is really important in Flagler County. And it does scale naturally from the east to the west. In terms of frequency of visits, they go pretty often. People go once or twice a month on average, close to half to 2/3 of everybody in the county who responded goes a couple times a month. There's a lot of people who reported we go once a week. There's a lot of people who reported we go 200 times a year, 300 times every day. There's a lot of use. And when they go, and so you can see the frequency of visits by zone is pretty high. And when they go, they do a lot of things. So it's not just I go to the beach and I like the beach. They do many things. So they go very often. It's very important to them. And they do a lot of things when they go there. So they walk, they sit, they bathe in the sun, they collect shells and swim and watch birds. Half of the people mentioned at least 5 things that they do. They may not do every single one every single time, but they go enough so that they can do each of these things over the course of the year, and they do them. Another component of the value to properties and the value to residents is the environmental value. So we can protect the beach and we can have use and enjoyment of the beach. And those are all monetary values. We protect the property value and we give you the opportunity to use and enjoy the beach, and that has a economic impact and a cost to it. The environmental value is to some degree what they call a non-market value. So we don't buy or sell it in the open marketplace, but it's a real value, and people really value that. When they looked at the Exxon Valdez oil spill in the 1980s up in Alaska, that environmental valuation and the value of lifestyle, that was a dollar amount which the federal government said, yes, we respect that that's a true value, and that value into the Cook Inlet area, which was poisoned by the oil spill up in Alaska, that value was accepted by the federal government as a way to assess the damages from the oil spill. So those kinds of environmental values have been in use in federal projects and federal suits at least since the 1980s. So we asked people, do you value the beach from an environmental standpoint? And the things they valued about it included coastal health, ecosystem habitat, fisheries, preservation for the future. I want my kids to see it. I enjoyed the beach, I enjoyed the surf and the fishing in the sand, and I want to keep that for posterity. So preservation for the future was important, and also preservation of wildlife. And again, you see that sort of same kind of scaling by zone and by distance from the beach. So the closer to the beach in the gray bars, the higher the value. And as you travel west or to the right in those bars, the values decline a little bit. We also surveyed businesses in Flagler County. So we looked at all residential properties, we then surveyed businesses. We only surveyed the businesses that were truly impacted by the visitor industry and by tourism. So retail, restaurant, hotel lodging, medical service because of all the snowbirds that come in, over the course of the year, and then potentially other offices. Among those groups, the percentage of their sales that they report as being paid by tourists and visitors or non-residents was generally between 30 and 40%. Medical service, of course, is the lowest, but very high rates of revenue go to these local businesses in Flagler County that come from visitors, and visitors are mainly coming for the beach. That accounts for about 2/3 of all the businesses in Flagler County. We assumed that the other third of businesses don't get any revenue and they're not willing to pay, and the beach doesn't determine, what kind of business they get or how much business they do. And so we ascribed their willingness to pay as zero, and we included those zeros in with our calculations to get an all-in business number. When we asked, were you willing to pay for beach restoration, 57% of tourism impacted businesses said, yeah, we're willing to pay something greater than zero. And that was our, main concern when we first started this thing, that people were going to say, I don't want to pay anything. Yeah, we're not interested. But not only did residents express significant willingness to pay, but the businesses did also, particularly the businesses impacted by the visitor industry. So a little bit more than half, 57% of tourism impacted businesses said they're willing to pay something greater than zero. 34% of the businesses were assumed to have zero willingness to pay.
Apologize. Is this, when you say businesses that you identified, were they just businesses in zone 1 or in those buckets, like all
Countywide,
restaurants?
yeah, all zones.
Just
all
all
zones.
zones, but like all restaurants and all zones,
Yes.
all medical. Okay.
Yep.
And do we have a number of how many participated, or?
I think we
idea?
had around 250 businesses that responded. The data, in my opinion, was not robust enough to give us a good scaling between zones. But we did get businesses in all zones.
Okay.
So I calculated the data for all of the business responses that we got, and then we scaled a future assessment according to the scale that was developed for residential. It's the best data we had.
I had just on that same area in that last slide, what surprised me was the hotels seemed to be lower than retail. I'd have guessed, if somebody were going to guess, I would guess that the hotels would be pretty high on being willing to support, because a lot of their businesses do with
Yeah.
people coming to the beach. So I just thought that was a little bit, see where it says accommodations?
I would think that
Yes.
would be closer to 100.
Yeah, don't you see that's only less than 30%.
Right. I mean, you would hope so, but that's how they responded. I would caution that these data are not very robust in that we didn't have a lot of responses. There was only a handful of hotels, only a handful of other types of businesses.
And that would make me think more.
And,
So
and you
it's-
don't know if business owners completed it versus,
We asked for business owners, but we might have gotten managers, we
could've
might have
gotten
gotten the
anything or
person that
something like
answered the
that.
phone kind of thing. So, it's as good as we could
Yeah.
make it. It's good as, and it's not perfect. But the key is that there was a clear expression that, yes, we're willing to pay. And yes, we're willing to pay something greater than zero. And we're not asking them to define what their benefit is. We're telling them, we're putting $10 million a year into Flagler County. Your fair share is going to be $7 million. Doesn't sort of tell you on a per person or per business basis what that cost would be. But they're looking at the information that they have and they're saying, yep, we need to pay something. We're aware of the problem. We use the beach. It's important. We get sales from it, and we're willing to pay.
Yeah, there could be, I mean, the hotel, the accommodations do pay the 5% bed tax. So maybe they're figuring, well, we're already given. We're
Yeah.
already,
I mean, for some of them, it's in effect, it feels like double taxation because, we're already paying the TDC tax and now we're being asked to pay for that. And some of that TDC taxes is going to beach renourishment. And that could be a reason to exclude some of those businesses.
I'm not sure they'd understand that.
So that was the business willingness to pay. public support for funding beach renourishment. So now we get into the dollars, and the real question asked to the public, are you willing to pay for this? So are you in favor of plans to fix, restore, and protect the beaches in Flagler County? So this is back to residential analysis and the residential public portion of the survey. 94% report being in favor of plans to fix the beach. It's really high. It's really, really high. All zones favor in excess of 90%. So I think the beach side, the Barrier Island was like 96 or 97%, and it only got as far down as 90% over on the west side. So very, very high percentage of the population said, yes, we're in favor of plans to fix and restore in the beach. So, okay, you like it, are you willing to pay for it? So we asked, do you think Flagler County should pay? And almost 80% say the county should help pay. Should Flagler County help pay its proportionate fair share for periodic, long-term shoreline protection and sand renourishment program along its beaches? 85, 87% on the Barrier Island say the county should pay, and even just below 80%, even in Zone 4. So if this went to referendum, this would pass by a 2/3 majority for sure. And then once we say, do you want the county to pay to fix it? They say yes. Do you want the county to pay for it? They say yes. And now we ask, will you pay for it? How much would your household be willing to pay? 76% of the people who responded said, yes, my household would be willing to pay. And again, much higher on the ocean side, on the Barrier Island, than out west. And you can see the people who are willing to pay zero scales from very low percentage willing to pay zero, just 10% on the Barrier Island. And then once you get out west, 30 to 33% say, no, we're not willing to pay. Countywide average, more than 3/4, 76%, favor some annual payment. And that could range from $1 to $10 a year, as high as more than $200 a year. So based on that, we created a scaling approach to assessments by zone. We took the $7 million and $10 million, calculated the benefit, and then ratioed those assessments across the zones. Again, this is the zone map. And talk about the benefits to local properties. So the benefits are defined as the project cost itself, and those have been legally determined to be valid approach to defining the benefits. The survey results demonstrate how the benefits are scaled from east to west, and we propose special assessment zones through an MSBU, Municipal Services Benefit Unit, so a special assessment. And we provided today a preliminary assessment revenue estimates, not a final tax roll. Still got a little bit of work to do on the final tax roll and the final configuration of the zones and the charges. Based on the survey data, it looks like zones 1 through zone 4. And we took zone 1 and we further broke that apart based on the engineering analysis that parcels that directly front the ocean receive much more physical protection than other properties on the Barrier Island, which aren't ocean front. So based on that, we split zone 1, which is the Barrier Island, into oceanfront Barrier Island and non-ocean front. So that's what 1A and 1B is. People on zone 1A, the annual protection for their property value may range from 0.1% up to 1% per year of physical protection. And that physical protection stretches certainly to the first tier of properties, much less to the second and third. You have to have like a 15 or 25 or 30-year level storm to impact properties 2, 3, and 4 tiers back from the ocean front. So the majority of physical property protection is ascribed to zones 1A. They'd pay around $578, almost $600 a year, and that would scale down the further west you go. I would note in Zone 4, the survey data say the people in Zone 4 are actually willing to pay a little bit more than the people in Zone 3. Again, I attribute that to survey sample error. We didn't have a lot of responses. I think that the rest of the data that we got in terms of willingness to pay, in terms of use and enjoyment, in terms of the valuation, all suggest that Zone 4 benefits are not as great as Zone 3 benefits. So in the final analysis, Zone 4 is going to go down. It's not going to be as high or higher than Zone 3. The businesses, a substantial amount of businesses, really don't receive much benefit or value. They were zeroed out. And we were able to create a business assessment based on that similar scaling by zone. We looked at the $10 million benefit received, which could be as high as $826 in Zone 1A, as low as $127 in Zone 3. And that gives us the maximum benefit. If we were to impose an MSBU on Flagler County, we would advertise it, and I'd recommend saying the maximum you would ever pay is based on this $10 million benefit, and then on an annual basis, we would levy something less. So you can say, here's the not to exceed number, it's a $10 million benefit, we're gonna collect 7 this year. You all get a break. So instead of being actually charged $826, we'll be charged $578 in Zone 1. There's also the question of other properties in the county which are not residential or vacant residential, not business or vacant business, as well as other lands like HOA properties, utilities, other government-owned lands. There's an alternative that we need to look at to see if large tracts of lands throughout the county, primarily the HOAs along the beachfront that are actually touching the beach, get an inordinate benefit, and or to make sure that they at least pay their fair share of benefit received. So we've calculated assessments for residential, we've calculated assessments for businesses. To impose a special assessment, it's got to be fair across all the properties that are benefited in the county. So we need to take a look at some of those other lands. And the HOA lands are part of that. So based on that, these are sort of the places that we have got to. So that's kind of the overview of the survey results. That's the initial take on assessments. This is some of the work that we need to do over the next few weeks, which is finalize zones 1A and 1B, determine any other zone structures, particularly in Zone 4, because there's a wide variety of lands, and there's also agricultural lands in Zone 4, so we need to take a special look at those areas as well.
I had one question just before we get off that one. Maybe you explained it, but say for in Zone 2 or Zone 1B, would it be a standard price per unit, or is it based on the value of that unit?
Standard price per unit.
So whether it was $1 million house or a $200,000 house,
Right.
the cost would be the same.
Yes. You could build a value component into that, but we've not. I mean, if this was an assessment, in my opinion, if this was an assessment that was going to be $1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000 a year, you'd probably want to look at a value component. But something that's on the order of a few $100s a year, it's probably not critical that you look at a value component.
I'm thinking, I think the zone 1 and 2, so zones 1 and 2, I think there could be some pretty big differences there with $500 versus $100 makes a difference in a number of those properties, I would think. But I just want to clarify that.
Yeah.
Fine, I got the answer.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So those are some of the next steps in determining the full assessment revenue generation. This is an alternative that, working with staff, we've examined and looked at, not final, but this could be some of the outcome based on including additional private property owners association properties along the beachfront, and giving a sense of what that would do to add additional revenue, and also the potential for lowering business assessments in other zones. So this one is an alternative, a possible alternative. Doesn't, and there's many ways to create an assessment, infinite ways to create an assessment. It has to be fair and reasonable. It has to be fairly apportioned between and among properties, and it has to demonstrate that a benefit's been received. So I think we've demonstrated that the benefit is received. Generally, it is scaled from east to west, and so that represents a fair apportionment between properties, between and among properties. And so there's a couple things that we need to line up still in terms of the other land uses outside of business and residential. This is one possible alternative with that. So that's the summary of where we're at. We hope to come back with some additional information, and maybe we'll open up to questions.
Questions?
Yes.
What's best practices in some other communities in relative proximity to us?
It's wide variety. We've also, PFM's also working with, and we've worked with Olson Engineering for 30 years in Amelia Island. Amelia Island does have a value component, and they have a neighborhood component in their assessment. But that assessment only covers the 2,600 units that are on the barrier island. So it's a little bit different in that it doesn't stretch county-wide. It's just for the barrier island. But they do have a neighborhood or a locational component to their assessment, as well as a value component. And then they all get a base charge.
What's the base charge?
It's probably around half of the annual assessment. The annual assessment's, I think, around 400 to 500, between 300 and 500 a year. And the base fee is probably about half of that.
Do they have situations there where they have owners associations that have, pay in bulk the same kind of challenges we have in terms of our
They
property
have,
ownership?
the Omni, and I forget the name of the owner now of the community, but the community has additional vacant lands, and those lands pay full freight. They pay the same. So if they have a large tract of land that is zoned for 150 units, they pay at 150 units.
For these large homeowners association you depicted here, so the individual homes would not be taxed?
Correct.
Just the homeowners association?
Correct.
Got it. Thanks.
How do you, where does ag lands fall into this? So is it counted as a business, or is it like the business that owns the ag lands, or how do you do that?
So that's one of the properties and land uses that we need to consider whether or not
Be assessed.
they'll be assessed at all. At the state level, for fire protection, the state of Florida exempts
That's right.
agricultural land for fire protection.
Right.
So there's a precedence for them being exempted for the ag lands themselves, but residential properties and residential uses within those ag lands do pay an assessment. And the same with churches. So religious properties are typically exempted from special assessments, but if you have a parishioner's home, and a home on church property, that home would pay a special assessment because that property is receiving the fire protection. So there's precedence for ag lands and other lands to be excluded, but those are some of the details that still need to be looked at. Part of that is, some commission direction is, who do we want to exclude? Who do we want to exempt? Do we exempt the properties that we normally exempt? Do we want everybody all in? Do we want to look at some of the alternatives differently from the way we've been doing it in the past? Those are some of the issues that, staff will probably be bringing up within the coming few
And
weeks.
then people who don't pay taxes now because they're exempt for disability or whatever, they would not be assessed or could be assessed this from a
Typically,
legal-
the exemptions apply to ad valorem taxes, and I don't,
Do they ever apply to, I'm just asking them, maybe our legal or
they,
an MSBU, can you apply to someone who's on a disability? Do you know if that?
it
balanced?
could be applied. I don't know if it is in the case here. Typically, with, disabled vets or widows or other exemptions, those apply to the
Yeah,
ad valorem,
but I'm wondering if
tax,
they-
and I don't know
Okay.
whether or not the MSBU charges, but, they're still putting the garbage out on the curb on Wednesday, and we still need to collect, for that service.
I'm confused with your asterisk at the bottom there about Zone 4.
So in this alternative, Zone 4, let's go back
I think
to
it's
this one. So in Zone 4, there's almost 3,000 residential units in Zone 4. In the proposal that we've got here, we would look only at those properties which are impacted by Cat 3 inundation maps, which are the zones to the north in the city of Palm Coast that are affected by Pellicer Creek. So there's, a greater benefit that goes to those properties because they'll receive potentially some flood protection from that project.
So the properties that are way west in our county, those aren't part of this process at all.
So in this alternative, they would be exempt, that's right.
Mhm.
Question, are all residences that are on the dune, are they directly on the dune? Are they treated differently in that zone, or is it the zone encompassed off the dune as well? The one
So-
closest to the beach, the zone?
So in Zone 1A, if the property touches the ocean, or they have direct access to the ocean, they're included. So, some properties are actually on the west side of A1A,
Right.
but the property stretches all the way across through the dune onto the high water mark. So they're included because they're actually, part of their property is being protected. Even though the structure may be on the west side, part of their property is protected on the east side of A1A.
And within, there's some multifamily or the condo units that are right on the beach. So how are they handled? Are they, as condos, they're individual properties, so they're
Right.
handled individually?
Yes.
Okay. and I think we have some commercial businesses, resorts that are right on the beach that have more of a direct benefit from protection from the dunes. Are those handled any differently?
They'd be in Zone 1A.
Zone 1A?
Yep.
And that's just by property, assessment by property, as a single property owner?
Right. They may have tenants, they have multiple tenants, but that if those tenants are renters, for example, but so that property owner would receive the assessment along in his tax bill.
Andy, I think that's what that lower part of that graph is. Like Hammock Dunes would pay.
No, I understand. That's shared amongst the
All the
owners within
residents.
that, right?
I just wanted to clarify that that bottom private POA, that is just the linear feet, the makeup of the dune and the beach. It's for those POA properties or homeowners association properties. It's not for the individual residents.
Right.
The individual residents in that community are either going to fall in Zone 1A or 1B. So the individual property owner where your house would be located will fall in either Zone 1A or 1B. And then the HOAs or POAs will have that linear footage made up that protects the assets for that community. That would be shared by, I'm assuming they would levy it through their HOA fees to collect.
So the HOA would levy the individual homeowners based on 1A or 1B?
No, we would.
Because we already established that they're not going to pay the assessment. Only the homeowners association is going to pay the assessment
They're
for the
two,
entire.
they're two different things. So the residential property, if you owned a home in Hammock Dunes, you're going to have, depending on where your house is, if you're facing the ocean, you're going to be in 1A. If you're across the street, you're 1B. However, the Hammock Dunes, the golf course, the frontage along the ocean, the roads, all of that interior infrastructure that's supported by having a project, the HOA gets assessed by their linear feet of shoreline. How the HOA or POA chooses to fund that, I'm assuming that they would levy it to the makeup of all of the property owners like they do now, for probably ongoing maintenance, replacing of flowers, paving of the roads, however they levy those costs to their residents. So it's two separate charges.
So they're basically double taxed.
No.
We're going to tax them twice.
No,
We're
it's-
going to tax them, and then the homeowners are going to tax, the association's going to tax them also.
The benefit or the assessment would be charged to the homeowners for the value and the benefit that it casts on their property. And then the HOA assessment is for the benefit and the value that it casts on the HOA property.
Right, but then the HOA is going to pass. the
But they're going to
cost
pass it
to the-
along, so.
Yep.
a homeowner in 1A is going to pay their fair share, and then they're going to get a rise in their dues to the homeowner association to
Right.
pay.
To pay
the-
for the
pay
benefit that goes to the HOA.
$614,000.
And would those homeowners include the people who live in the high rises? that own-
Yes.
So that, that really is taxation.
A lot of money.
I know that you don't have it here, but when you do it by value, when you were talking about if you were to take this approach by value on properties, what happens with the POAs? Is it just property, they roll into the value or not? There wouldn't be a linear calculation. If you just did value, or explain to me the Amelia, I think it's Amelia Island or Fernandina, what is it exactly they do? terms
In
of-
Amelia, they have a base fee. They have a neighborhood fee if you're oceanfront, east of A1A or west of A1A, so a neighborhood fee. And then they have a value component, which is about 30% of that assessment, 30% of the 50%, 50% being.
And so when
the-
they do that,
fee.
obviously, the people that live on the waterfront, because the valuations are higher, tend to pay more in those zones that benefit most.
Yes.
Is that it?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
the $10 million home that's on the oceanfront will pay more than the $10 million home that's just east of A1A, and that'll pay more than the $10 million home
Out
west of
west.
A1A.
Got it.
But the value component is comparatively small. I'm not, I don't
Doesn't
recall.
change things.
It does.
Oh, it does, okay.
It does, yeah. Yep. And that could be a way to do it. As I said, there's a lot of ways to, what was the old Norwegian saying? No matter how you cut the jello, it still wiggles. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of ways that you can make an assessment. It needs to be fairly apportioned, fair and reasonable, and it needs to reflect the benefit received. So, the commission has wide latitude to make those kinds of decisions, what you believe is fair and reasonable. And so a value component is one way to do that. The linear footway is another way to do that. I'm not sure if the property appraiser's data includes a value of the HOA properties. So because
Right.
they're exempt from ad valorem tax for the purposes of ad valorem, they might be valued at zero. So then there's a question of, well, what is the value of that stuff? So
Or you can do like what has ad valorem have a value approach to that, and then linear back to the POAs, like a combo of the,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that would also be a fair and reasonable way to do it. I think this approach was pretty straightforward, pretty easy to digest, and a simple way in, a fairly simple division with a scaling by zone. And the survey data supports that. The survey data clearly shows, the folks on the Barrier Island, highly valued, highly used, and highly willing to pay. And then that scales down as you go to the west. And so I think in that regard, survey data was very helpful and very successful in helping us establish fair and reasonable zones, and also indicating that there's very high awareness and very high support among the public for this kind of a program. The awareness was off the charts, and the willingness to pay was very, very high, higher than you would normally get even on a percentage required to pass a referendum. So if you went to referendum to say, will you vote the penny tax for this? Likely it would pass based on these kinds of results.
So I guess there's some internal, at least in my portion, some analysis to be done. Like a question I would assume is the value, as you said, based on the value to an interior, say a zone 3 property owner. The proportionate value to the value of their property should be less than somebody who's on the beach or in 1 or 1A or 1B.
That's why 1A was dramatically higher.
Right. So I don't know that fully is exemplified in the chart yet. I think there's some of that by example is going to have to be pulled out so that there is a wide range of different sample projects or residences that are given values so people can see that change from US 1 from 95 to the beach.
Right. So if it's a $250,000 home on zone 2, they're paying 100, but then a $750,000 home in zone 1A, they're paying 550.
Right, but I think there's lots of variations in values throughout the Barrier Island.
Yep.
I mean, there's people on the Barrier Island that,
Yeah.
as we've seen in some of our analysis, that are not in, multi-million-dollar homes, but have been there forever.
Yeah, we've got a lot of trailers and, old Florida type
But
homes.
their property is without the dune system, without the beach nourishment. That's the first wave to go in that storm. But so, and I guess the other I guess the next part in my analysis is just understanding how a lot of the different communities up and down the beach are funding this. I mean, we've seen examples of St. Johns County doing it. We've all the way up and down the East Coast. There's different government agencies that are supporting this in order to re-nourish the beach, not just the. And unfortunately, we've had, from a public perception standpoint, we've had two different scenarios. We've had the emergency dune placement to immediately protect the properties, and we've seen, just minor storms whittle away at those, which has been perceived in, that even though that's what it was intended to do, all that money is being washed back out. The expansion of the beach is a whole different project in and of itself. So that from a communication standpoint, we still have some of that work to do as well.
Right.
Anybody else?
I think it's more complicated. I understand what you've done here, but I think it can get pretty complicated when you bring value in. And there's always going to be those people on the edge. Well, am I 1A, 1B? I think it's pretty clear. I'm thinking of all the problems we had with the Flagler Beach area for the Army program, when a person just has a little tiny sliver of land on the ocean, and then would be charged the full price, and somebody else who has, like a couple 100 feet on the ocean being charged the same. So I can just see those kind of things. We had enough problems getting the 140 authorizations for the Army program over pretty minor issues. We could get into the same kind of problem here. That's all I'm saying.
I think the numbers overall are very fair, and I like them, but I think where we run into trouble is Zone 1B. And again, somebody's already stated it, we got $2 million homes and you got
But you're,
$30,000 homes.
you mean on the alternative, because can you go back to the other slide? Oh, there we go. That zone 4 is all of zone 4, right? Or still
Yes.
city upon, that's all of zone 4.
Yes, this one would be
Right.
all of Zone 4.
I like the Zone 4 where they pay zero.
I do too.
I like that one.
Who's in Zone 4?
But no, but no, yeah, because this one is interesting. I don't know. It's very hard. It's a lot to digest and think about.
No, I like the numbers in the alternative assessment. I like those numbers. I think those make sense. That one.
Can you show
That's
us?
an annual
Can you show
assessment.
us again Zone 1B?
Yes. I'm sorry?
Could you show us Zone 1B again?
The map?
The map.
or-
I'm sorry. Yes.
Sure.
It's kind of hard to see.
What is considered Zone 1B? In the black lining.
Well,
The,
Everything.
green.
Oh,
Oh, Zone 1B
1B.
is actually not,
hard to see.
reflected or
yeah,
sorry.
not,
Yeah.
Zone 1B is actually not shown on this map.
It's everything that's not on the beach.
Correct.
Everything that's not
Ah,
on the beach.
That's
Okay.
on, that's
It's within the
east of
black
intercoastal,
lining
right.
almost. Okay.
That's not on the beach. If it's
Yeah,
not on the beach,
if you
then you're
touch,
1B.
if you touch the ocean, you're in Zone 1A.
Okay, so now 1B, now go to the alternative.
And that would be everybody else.
That must be everything basically intercoastal.
To the beach,
Right. Okay.
or to the first
Would be
tier
1B.
of properties.
So Island Estates is 1B.
What?
Island Estates is 1B.
Yes.
Yeah.
Flagler Beach.
Yeah, most of Flagler.
Well, most of Hammock Dunes is
Yeah. Yeah.
1B.
A lot of the properties touch, right? Al would know because of the easement. Properties extend to the beach. A1A kind of bisects them. A lot of the properties extend to the beach that are on the western side of A1A.
140.
Well, in Hammock Dunes, you got the high rises that all touch the beach.
Right.
They touch the beach. They're 1A.
Yeah.
Does it make, what was the rationale for splitting 1A and 1B up Was there rationale to that?
Yeah, just the 1A is if your property touches the ocean. So if you,
Direct benefit,
Yep.
technically.
Yep.
Right.
Got it. Okay.
And that makes sense.
I mean, they get most of the physical protection. That physical protection extends to some other properties on the barrier island in a strong storm, which doesn't occur that often, and some flood protection if the barrier island is overtopped and the canals west of the intercoastal flood or Pelzer Creek starts to back up. You know, that's some storm and flood protection. But most of that protection is really like, you know, pounding waves in your backyard.
Okay. You said that they had a neighborhood component up in north of us. What was the neighborhood component?
So,
Is it just like that linear breakout or?
yeah, on Amelia Island, it was the same definition as Zone 1A. So if you touch the ocean, that's oceanfront. And then everybody else to the west is what they called east of A1A. So east of A1A to the ocean, and then the other neighborhood, the third neighborhood, is west of A1A to the intercoastal.
And can we explain the commitment that the county's under currently and through the next expansions for the amount of money per year, our current commitments, and then in the future phases?
I'm not sure if I understand.
Well, we have a commitment on the renourishment projects for our cost share. And this is based on our commitments to our share of renourishment. So I think you'd mentioned the 10 max, but levy it at 7. So that'll just have to be correlated as well to that will be clarified. This is our commitment to and our share of funding for these projects moving forward.
Correct. Correct. When we actually worked with Olson Engineering and looking at what those intervals are and what that annual amount that we needed to collect, that's where we would be capturing it at the 7 million. And that's what we would be setting aside each year so that in that 6th year, we would have that money available, pledged towards that. Right now, we don't have funding set aside for that.
Okay, so I think that's an important part or component of this is clarifying that at least in those first few years, we're building up that reserve for our commitment in the future.
Correct. And then there's some additional costs, like you're going to have annual monitoring of the beach. That's going to be funded out of this. If there is a no-name storm that doesn't come with a component of federal or state funding, like typically you have a 12.5% local match that we'd have to come up with on a project that is named. If you had any non-named storms where we had to put some emergency berm or some other, there's a small portion, a piece of that is included in this as well.
I think it's fair to point out, though, that once we get the initial beach replenishment done, that those cases of washouts are going to be few and far between because we're going to have that extensive beach built up, which will prevent that. But we will have to do some beach renourishment, but not catastrophic beach failure. The goal here is that when we have a problem, we can write a check. That's the goal here. And as I've said many times, we're the only county in Florida that does not have a plan, does not have a financial plan. So, we need to get this done.
So is the revenue projected to be 7 million a year
Yes.
based on this plan?
That's
And
right.
will we always, apologize for asking this, need 7 million on that?
Well, that's the figure,
The
that
estimate?
will do it. That'll keep it, that's what all the studies have said for us, is we need about that between 6 and 7 million. That will keep us whole. Again, considering we're going to get something from FEMA or from the state also.
Yeah, just one thought. get mad at me if I say this, but couldn't you make a case to reduce the 7 million or 10 million total by the amount of money we get from the Tourist Development Council piece? You know, each year there's a certain amount of money goes into that fund, beach renourishment. So I could make the case that that's part of the $7 million.
If the TDC monies are going to fund the beach management plan, that could potentially be part of it.
Yeah, I hate to, I'm just saying that that's money that's designated to the beaches, and maybe that would be a little way to alleviate some of the tax.
And you're right, Dave, it does. We've got a piece of that fund goes to the beach every year.
And then the MSBU can be adjusted annually. We're going
Correct.
to look at ad valorem, so that if we're rolling over money year after year, because we're not needing to touch it as much, it could be reduced. In theory, I'm just asking a question, right? The MSBU can always be adjusted.
I think the initial project is a pretty large capital
Yeah,
expenditure.
outlay.
So some of that's going to be loaned and borrowed monies. So we may have debt service that's required to pay that.
Yeah,
All
because we
right.
don't have the money to pay for phase 3. It's not there.
Yeah, so it's going to be a while.
Yeah.
You know, that 7 million may hold up longer than you think, because it may be a while before those beaches
Right.
are in a situation where they aren't, we will be replenishing sand up there.
Yeah, the project, I think, Olson has said that the renourishment project and the periodic maintenance subsequent to the initial project is pretty aggressive on a 6-year schedule. And, we might get lucky and get away with 7 or 8. On the other hand, we might get unlucky and
Yeah.
have to do it in 5. But, 6 years is highly protective and is pretty aggressive in terms of renourishment.
Yeah, I think Amelia.
State your name if you could.
Sure. Bill Hobensack, Olson Associates. Yeah, when you use the example of Amelia Island, they're designed for like a 7 to 8 year renourishment cycle, but we have extended that longer when situations occur. And like you were saying, the initial project is a big project. Then we'll have a 6-year renourishment cycle, which can be adjusted need be given circumstances.
Okay, good. Thank you.
And just one, along those lines, the Army Corps project has a 10-year cycle. We still are obligated for a piece of that. So would that money we would get from this fund pay for our piece of the Army program renourishment cycle?
Yes,
Okay.
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, thank you. So, Ms. Petito, next steps for us. Obviously, there's a few questions up here, or at least what do you see as progressing? Are we going to continue this to the next workshop so that we can finalize the program or that one spreadsheet?
We can certainly set it up for another workshop. We do have some additional work that we need to do. We need to continue to validate the proposed assessment amount, finalize, tweak it, as well as the zones. We do, just to put it on everybody's radar, we do have to get consent from the cities through ordinance, and this will need to happen before we can levy the amounts. So as far as the logistics of it, we've got a lot of work to do. We would look to adopt this through levy in September at a public hearing. So if we started looking at that September date for that public hearing and start working back, we know that we need to allow for a 20-day notice prior to the hearing. Because we have different zones that are going to be paying different amounts, we still have to work it out with the property appraiser and tax collector, because we might not be able to use that trim notice envelope. We may have to notify the property owners through another method. But once we determine how we are going to, do that component, we can work with them to determine, how that notice is getting out. We do need to adopt a resolution at the July 15th meeting with the tentative assessment amounts so that we can levy them in September. It'll be an amount that you can always decrease. It'll be an amount not to exceed, and then you can always lower it in September. So between now and July 15th, we've got a lot of work to do as far as finalizing the amount of the assessment, working with the cities to establish an ordinance that will allow us to charge their residents.
Just one-
Go ahead.
Well, in the beginning, we talked about MSTU versus the other one, MSTB or
BU,
MSB.
benefit,
MSBU. So which is this?
BU.
BU.
That's what I thought, okay.
So you almost need, because just what you're saying, you almost need us to roll with something today.
We can follow up
much.
with another workshop in, probably in the next couple weeks, but we're going to need a determination then.
So I think, just real quick, does anybody want to see numbers based on value? Or an idea of that, what that looks like?
I'd
or
like
no?
to see something in that area.
I-
That 1A and 1B.
I think there has to be a correlation in value. I think the residents are going to
Yeah.
necessarily see that their proportion and to attribute it to their value, and then those that are receiving more of a benefit, it's higher. I think that transparency level has to be proven, and then and more importantly, I just want to make sure that there's consensus from us giving this direction to the administration to continue. So
One of the directions is it's going to be an MSBU
BU at this
as
stage.
opposed to something else.
It's not a tax, so it's a benefit unit, so it's an assessment or a fee.
But we would have to, we agree with that. I agree with that.
That's the only way you're going to be able to do it. You're not going to be able to do a TU.
So we
It has
should
to be a
agree to that.
BU.
Yeah, BU is the only one that makes sense.
Yeah.
So there's anybody that does not agree with moving forward with this plan so that the administrator can work with the municipalities on their ordinances, knowing that this isn't a finalized spreadsheet of values just yet? All right, so I don't hear any objections.
I'm not. I would certainly want to know more about what happens up and down the coast. I mean, if Commissioner Hanson says that we're the only county that doesn't have a financial plan for beach management, I'd like to understand what some other communities do, what other
Agreed.
counties do. I just don't understand it. And I
Well,
don't,
I've been to the conference every year where they talk about this, how they do that. And the counties south and on the west coast have built up their funds. So when they do a beach renourishment, they actually just write a check.
Right, but
Because
it's
they've
how do
got-
they build up the funds is
They
his-
do this.
is
They've
his
all
question.
done
We're
this.
starting.
Yeah, they've all done.
I
something
agree
like
with your
this.
question.
No, they've all done, not this particular model, but they've all done something like this, where they have a dedicated fund that's only for beach renourishment. And there are different ways to establish that fund. This is one. Sometimes they just peel off ad valorem money and just stash it, just like a reserve fund. But
like, I know it's not an exact analogy, or comparison, but, if I'm a property owner in St. Lucie County, close to 95, what am I paying? And how does that relate, to our Palm Coast residents? Because you're talking about 31,000 of them, or 31,000 taxpayers, property owners just in that community, and just need to, this is just me. I'm one of five, but you're asking, so.
no, I think it's worthwhile to pulse, just go down and ask a couple other counties how they did it. How'd they get that money into that fund?
And I'm,
Because they've all done it differently, but
And
they've achieved it though, and that's the important thing. They've got the money now to, when they have a problem, they just write a check, which is where we want to be. That's where we want to be.
can we also look at on the difference between Zone 4 and Zone 3 of making it the railroad track? The FEC Railway?
That is straighter.
Huh?
It is straighter.
Well, I'm looking at the growth patterns,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
and I think it's I think the railroad tracks is a more definitive
Mhm.
But that
delineation.
Zone 3 should run the length of the east side of the railway.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
That would get
Well,
more
that's as we
land.
come in with
Yeah.
everything that's
And it
going on
could,
down there.
it could,
That would
As
get
the
more land into
housing-
3, right? If we
Well,
did
you could
that.
see it right here on the map. I mean, it goes, it's just straight down and there's definitely a lot of
It
development.
does go the length of the railway. I apologize because that's US 1. And, well, you're right. So somewhere at some point it doesn't, because County Road 304 and I don't even know how to explain that. So there is projected growth that's put into Zone 4 that is more likely to.
One of the things that we were looking at with Zone 4 is to divide it up, similar like how we have Zone 1, A, B, having an A, B, and C for Zone 4 to look at the unincorporated City of Bunnell and City of Palm Coast. And you would establish an amount that is a not to exceed amount, but you could in certain areas levy nothing. But at least you're establishing what that baseline would be, worst case scenario if you chose to levy, so that we don't have to annually renotice. It's similar to like the garbage assessments, where we have a maximum amount not to exceed, so that we don't have to renotice every year. It would be part of our ongoing budget hearings.
It's complicated now.
Well, that would make sense, considering what City of Palm Coast is talking about doing, west of the railroad track. That would make sense to establish like a 4A.
That's kind of the mindset of what we were talking about internally, but when we're looking at the flood maps, the inundation maps, that's kind of another driving factor when you look at it. We didn't share that with you today. I know some of you maybe have seen them before, but anywhere in Palm Coast is going to be impacted with those flood and inundation maps. The area that needed to get captured was that one to the north, all those new areas west of US 1, close to Pellisier. That's why we added that. But as you continue to have that growth west, it's going to be equally as impacted. So I do think it makes sense to break out Zone 4 into 3 areas.
Just on that, though, the west is different. They also flood because of the St. Johns River and Crescent Lake and all that area. But that's not a result of beach flooding. That's a result of St. Johns River.
It's typically when you get
So
like
will,
nor'easter.
my final, the reason I bring that up is at some point we'd be coming up with a similar study as to why we should be taxing the people who live out in that area for flood protection or, setting aside
Stormwater.
a fund when they flood.
For stormwater projects.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
they
So I'm
would
thinking
be,
the stormwater project may have an impact more, I don't know, more or less, on them because it's,
you would be looking at a similar thing, just reverse, I guess, because when we looked at the stormwater, you looked at the projects and they were out west. So you
Right.
wouldn't, you would have the people, again, receiving the biggest benefit, paying for it.
right. So, I mean, we could do it all in one time and say the money that also will handle flooding in the western part of the county.
I probably wouldn't commingle them. I think
But
they're
I
two
think that would
different.
get really complicated if we
Yeah.
tried to do that, yeah.
It sounds too hard.
But the people in the west are gonna say, well, we got another one coming, so if you're gonna, it's a good idea not to charge them like we're saying now, because they'll have this other stormwater.
Well, and we haven't dealt with a special assessment of Daytona North. We haven't talked about what to do with ag.
Yeah, so could get pretty complicated.
As it stands right now, we weren't proposing charging ag or Daytona North with this. In Zone 4, the only area that would get covered is that relatively new construction that's along US 1, north of the roundabout, that area.
And areas that are within the inundation maps. In other words, showing that certain category storms will flood them.
I'm sorry, do we need to address vacant land? vacant lands?
Yeah, I think, right now my contemplation is that they receive much the same benefits that the homes, that the residential lands with structures. So just include them, on a per unit basis. The benefit is to the property. The property benefits from proximity to the beach for anybody who might live there to have access and use the beach. And the property values are determined based on your access and availability to that amenity and also the quality of environment and environmental protection. So
And so how it's done, so they, like if it's a residential zoning, it would get residential. If it's a commercial, industrial, institutional, it would be charged the business fee.
right, right. And that's what it also happens up in Amelia Island. So the vacant big omni parcel with 146 residential units, which is vacant, no structures, they pay as if it's 146 units. They have zoning for 146, no structures, but they receive the benefit.
So the vacant commercial gets charged like the highest density that could go on it? Is that what you're saying? You're saying like,
If there was a value component, yes.
yeah, see.
Yeah.
Wow.
So if something floods off the intercoastal, not due to I'm just saying hypothetical, not due to a storm in the ocean, does this funding cover that?
No.
Because, Flagler, South Flagler Beach can get flooded from the intercoastal very
That's
easily.
FEMA. That's a FEMA issue.
Yeah, so I'm just saying that.
Not us.
But that would be 1B area. And so they'll be paying this fee, but if they flood, it doesn't automatically cover their problems, depending on what caused the flooding.
No.
This is coastal renourishment.
This
I
is-
got it. But they're saying
Beach
Pelletier
renourishment.
Creek, they're adding something because it could be coming in off the ocean. Is that why they're saying that?
Yes, that there would
Even
be
though
some,
that connects into the intercoastal before it goes to the ocean.
I think that's why there's have zones, because those zones are affected more. That's why there's the zoning.
Okay, I'm just saying that, all right.
I like this whole presentation. I like this alternate perspective, but I think there's two questions you need to answer for us. One is, can we divvy up maybe zone 3 to add the little western part of 3 and use the railroad track? And then zone 4, give us a 4A and a 4B maybe. And then on the value issue, I think the only area that I think we need to kind of look at the value is 1B. I think there's problems in 1B. There's trailers, there's tents. There's a lot of people that are just barely making it over there. And I don't think we need to tax them that amount. But the numbers you've come up with, I'm pleased with those numbers because I thought it was going to be a really burden on people. And I think those are pretty rational numbers that we can use. But so that would be my suggestion in going forward would be to do that. If you would just do that, take those tasks right there and then come back and tell us about it and say in a position where we can say, yeah, that's a good idea and vote on it. And I'd like to see if there's any other suggestions, but I think that's what we need to do.
I don't know if it's as simple as that, but I think you have to see the valuation piece, I have to see
Yep.
the
For the whole
value.
thing?
Yeah, for the whole thing,
Nah,
or at least zones
I think 1B.
1 through 3.
You have to do 1B. The rest of them, I think, was pretty reasonable numbers.
Well, I don't think he gets to split it like that. Like, hey, you get to do the alternative to this, but they are done it. Can you do that? So I know that sounds insane. So can you take like a particular zone 1s and 1B and say you're restricted to a valuation method, and then zone 2, 3, and 4 are restricted to a
per parcel,
per parcel like,
Right.
method.
unknown. I have to study it.
Yeah. And can you get it done in 25 days?
Right.
Well, that's
it's
my
a shame we're up
concern.
against a clock on that one, on this. Or are we up against a clock? It has to be implemented this year.
And we might be able to look at that question and use land use as a proxy for value, and that might make it simpler. So there may be alternatives that we can use which effectively do the same thing, but maybe a simpler method. So we can look at that, see if it's a rational alternative.
I mean, Commissioner Penny, it's a fair question. We, in 35 days, in order to get a lot of this done, what was the thought process in getting it done this year? Or if you run into obstacles and it doesn't happen, what does that do moving forward?
Well, it would just delay whatever you're going to be able to do. You have the northern project, as Commissioner Hanson pointed out, that doesn't necessarily have the complete funding. So it's going to delay some of your future projects, and then it'll put you a year behind. If you're going to start the Army Corps project next month, you're going to need to start capturing money to pay for that renourishment whenever that interval is. So that's why essentially you really should be starting it now, the same time that you're starting those projects, not delaying it because it's going to put you further behind. Essentially, you'd have to probably make up for that and collect more by delaying it.
Right, that's the downside.
Correct.
Any other questions, comments?
I need to see the valuation method
Mr. Hadid?
for calc.
Okay, I'm listening to you, and especially regarding the variation in value in what we call the 1B area. And how do we do that in a way that's the fairest and most equitable to 1B owners who may occupy, on the one hand, a multi-million-dollar property or a mobile home? And one way to do that is through an MSTU. In other words, based on the value. So the person who has a higher value property is going to pay more to protect their property as opposed to, and I'm just saying this as an example, I don't mean to be negative about it, but a mobile home property. Okay? So that's one way that you can inject the equity without having to deal with a fixed benefit value where people may not view it as being fair. Because they're paying, I'll use the mobile home example, they're paying the same amount as the person with the $1 million home, and they don't think that's fair. Okay? You could take that approach. We could take that approach for 1A and 1B altogether. MSTU, in other words, ad valorem. So you're paying based on the value of your property. And then all the other zones, 2, 3, and 4, you can use MSBUs, where it's a fixed amount, all right? And maybe those value differences, because the amounts, the benefit amount is so much less in terms of magnitude. The magnitude, the higher magnitude charges are naturally on the beachfront. So that's one way to work it out. Now, if that sounds appealing to you, well, we'd have to do the MSTU by July 1, if that's appealing to you. So that means we'll have to work very hard. We'll have to work with the city of Flagler Beach, Marineland, Beverly Beach. We could try to use that approach where you're minimizing this impact that you were earlier articulating.
But the difficulty in that is not having numbers to see the impact to them based on the value of their home, and then what would the MSB look like on the rest of everyone else?
Any other direction? I mean, I don't know that you can do that at this, I mean, the time
It's not a
constraints
It's a
are.
time, it sounds,
Too short, I think.
I like to entertain the thought of it, but that's
I think,
But today's the 3rd.
Does, this can be done by, what, a 4/5, a supermajority of the board, either of these options? Or
By
is that?
majority.
well, it's, the other municipalities are the wild card at this point.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, if you had, if you had the other municipalities on board, that, is this an action of the board, or it has to be, go to referendum? I'm confused.
Part of the budget.
No, MSTU, MSBU's do not have to go to referendum unless we plan to use them for debt or something.
Got it. Okay. Sorry, I didn't remember that.
Um, So which of the two, MSTU, MSBU, has to be done by July 1st? Both of them?
No, the taxation, MSTU, where we're using ad valorem, we have to give the notice to the Department of Revenue, that's why.
That's too hard.
It's not that it's too hard, it's that it's too hard. We don't know if that's the right answer or
Yeah.
not because we don't have
We
any
don't- right.
figures.
But that
It's a
would be
shame
one
that
way
this
of
took
adding the
Till
values.
June to get here,
That would be a way of adding the values in to the tax
You know?
total bill.
right? You don't know if that's the right answer or not.
Well,
I mean, it's
so
probably,
it took
Yeah.
a long time, took years for the tax assessor to come up with these values. If we start something new, it'd be, I guess we could use the same numbers, just use the numbers.
yeah.
I mean, could we do that? Al, could we just use the MSTU ad valorem numbers to figure out what for 1A and 1B, costs will be?
Well, that's the only way you can do it. You take the tax assessor.
I mean,
You take his numbers,
yeah, just take his numbers and it's still MSBU.
property appraiser's numbers.
Yeah.
And you'd use them. I think we're up against a 1 July date to get that done. That's
Well, we're
tough.
back here on June 10th, right?
Not if it's an MSBU.
No, it's a B.
Yeah,
we're
workshop
okay.
in a week. We're back here on the 10th and then the 17th.
This still has to go in front of other city boards. Police,
The MSTU, not necessarily, right? You need the MSBU for the other municipalities?
For either one of them, you're going to have to get approval of the cities.
Okay.
Well, that's going to.
So in looking at timelines, we know when they're meeting next and the work that has to be done with their staff to get them adequate information in order to weigh in on this in time. And it seems like one hiccup along the way is going to, the work effort to date will be nil.
You would essentially, I mean, just looking at the calendar, you essentially would have to probably adopt something by the 17th because you only have one more meeting. I mean, you could do it at a workshop. We could call for a special workshop for it, but you're kind of backed up with being less than a month away.
And July only has one meeting.
and we really have no public input on any of this.
We only have the second meeting in July.
Right. Right, we would be publicly discussing this at the next meeting.
Yeah.
Correct. And the last week in June, you have your Florida Association of Counties conference as well, the last week of June.
I think we have to have an analysis of what Plan B looks like if there is a hiccup along this way. So what is the value? What is it? How does that impact the, if it doesn't get started till next year, what does that do to, are we, instead of budgeting on the 7, or then we budgeting on the 10s for the 10 million? Is that what happens next year, or does that number move to 8 or 8.5 in order to still fulfill our requirement?
We'd have to do some sort of a calculation. I don't know on the fly what it would look like. We'd have to kind of redo it.
Right, but I'm just saying, right, we have to plan for the unexpected, and typically with the timeline that I'm looking at, any unexpected is going to bump it, and we have to be ready. We have to have a plan for that. And it's not all in our hands at this point, so we're not in control.
Correct. And I think if we did the MSBU, I think it would be easier than the MSTU because of the timing.
Right.
If there's a way that we can incorporate the property value component or look at comparisons of what other communities do, come back, I think you probably have a greater probability of having something that you're all comfortable with. You're not on that July 1 timeline. You have until September 15th. It's just the leading up to it of getting the work going on the ordinance.
Right, you have to have the ordinance done by the middle of July, you said, for us to stay on the timeline for the
Correct.
MSBU.
Correct, mid-July.
Okay. So,
And I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, since you are factoring in those hiccups and whatever, we have an August date. I'm not sure exactly where it falls, say mid-August, or maybe first week of August, that we have to send out the notice that definitively tells people what the maximum charge is, where they are, why we're doing it, how we're apportioning it, what we're going to do with the money.
right. Okay, so let's plan to be back here with whatever we can update in a week. Let's keep the workshop we had tentatively scheduled. Let's make sure we can come back and review any updates that we have. And then we'll be, I think we should put a holder in the agenda for the 17th so that we can advertise it, but we still, I know, because even next meetings will be past the deadline for agenda items, so we need to at least have that as a placeholder in the agenda.
We can certainly add both of those. We have a budget workshop on the 10th with the constitutionals. We can add it to that meeting, give you an update. And then again on the 17th, we have a regular board meeting and another workshop.
Right. Okay. Anything else? This was just one item today, huh?
Public comment, and then we do
Sure.
have the non-general fund budgets to talk
Right.
about.
Did we really give him direction? Do you feel like you have direction? I thought about it.
Mostly. All I need is about 3 or 4 more staff. I think we'll be good.
Sorry.
Okay, we'll open it up for public comment on this item. Is there anybody that wishes to address the commission on this item? Afternoon, just state your name.
Sure. Greg Davis, President, Hamilton Dunes Owners Association. And I brought my little team along with me here. Where's Travis at? Yeah, Travis is right here. Travis Hauk and also David Eckert. First of all, I want to say to you that I applaud your efforts in moving forward on the local funding initiative. I think that's critical to get this done. And I understand the difficulty and the toughness of task, but I got to tell you that Mother Nature cannot wait. It's something that we do need to get done, and we need to get it done as quickly as possible. So I applaud your efforts on that as well. With regard to the study and the discussions and things that have been done today, I mean, I think it's a great beginning effort. I really do. I think to compliment the staff for putting together your thoughts and the kinds of questions and details you're talking about. I do believe that there are details that need to be worked out, but I think that's just part of what the process is today. So I applaud your effort on that as well. There's a number of things within the details that I'm not sure we can really kind of cover today. I need to get a better understanding of what this POA means, because to be frank with you, that there's limitations that we have within our governing documents and how we can do assessments itself. So as an example, we do our assessments based on our governing documents, based on a per unit basis. Our governing documents do not cover assessments based on an ad valorem basis or as a share. So for us, that would be a conflict, I guess, if you, when you're talking about value with our governing documents. And conflict for us, what that means is to make a change from an HOA perspective does require more than a supermajority vote, may require 100% vote for us to adopt that kind of change based on our governing documents. So that is, as a comment, is one of the things. It's just structure in terms of but I think that we'll be able to, work through those kind of items. Is in terms of delay, I would highly encourage the board not to delay this process. I mean, our beaches are in such a condition today, okay, that we cannot afford a delay on the beaches or on this process. I mean, obviously, it's triggered by a number of things. One is that in order for the county, as you all know better than I do, to get the funding that's necessary, state and federal, there has to be a local contribution to that. It absolutely has to be done. We can't afford to delay. Am I limited to 3 minutes? Is that what it is? Okay, so.
Go ahead.
Okay.
You give him your time.
I'll say something personally.
Okay, go ahead.
David Eckert, Cali del Sur. Technically, I wanted to try to transfer as much information to you as we could. This is the only time that we get a chance to talk to you all at one time. Know that within the context of the coastal line, there's no property owner that touches the ocean in any of the DRI area. So it's only the homeowners associations that have the common property. So there's a portion for Hammock Dunes, there's a portion for Ocean Hammock, and a portion for Hammock Beach Resort. So within the context of what the consultant explained, there would be no individual in the 1A category. It would be 1B category. So within that context, when you go to consider what's going to be paid within the homeowners association, all the properties are going to be 1B. Now, all the parcels I expect for cases like the Dunes Community Development District, all the other, because they have many different parcels in Hammock Dunes that are taxed. And you also have the club with many, many parcels. So it's a complicated issue within our community that you're dealing with as to whether each of those gets a one parcel assessment or not. The other complexity that I'd like to make sure that you understand is we want this to be bulletproof from a legal standpoint as to how you structure this. And the idea, if you're going to have a linear tax, and it would be a good way, I think, if you tax the preservation area to the HOAs, that is a revenue source, but it has nothing to do with the individual property owners because none of those houses and none of the people living in the condos are on the coastal property. So none of the people, they would be paying under 1B. And the governing documents of, as far as I know, on all of the homeowners associations are uniform taxation. When you take a common property within Hammock Dunes, you divide it by 1,182 people. That's how you get, and it's an equal thing. So it's very important that we coordinate so that we don't end up with at cross purposes between the governing documents of the homeowners associations and the structure that you set up for this approach. I think that MSBU would be very much easier than an MSTU. And the other point that I would make too is if you do a linear tax, you got to be careful that we don't have anybody challenging that from the standpoint that you're not going to do a linear tax on the whole 18 miles. Because if you do a linear tax on the 18 miles, I think that's bulletproof. But if you do a portion of the 18 miles, I'm not exactly sure how you justify that. So I'd like to keep working with you guys as much as you can on these technicalities.
Thank you.
So again, I'm excited about this. We want to work with you on it. I understand it's a tough problem. I think the staff is doing a great job in moving this forward. But again, I would encourage the commission not to have any delays in moving this forward. And again, I would agree. I think an MSBU from an HOA perspective is a better option. However, we figure that out. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anybody else for public comment on this item? All right, I'll bring it back to the dais for the commission, and we'll move on to the next item.
Thank you. We'll be in touch. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you guys for being here with us. We're just going to go over the capital improvement program for next year, what we have planned, as well as some of the non-general fund departments. So here's a look at today's agenda. We'll go over each one of these in a little bit more detail. So looking at our capital improvement program, as you know, this is a 5-year plan to list the county's direction and priorities regarding our assets and infrastructure. So we're going to be talking about projects or equipment that have a cost estimate at or above $50,000. In the case of IT, it's only $10,000, and also has to have an asset life of at least 5 years. Our preservation includes major repair and maintenance projects at or above $10,000. Approximately about $2 million comes out of your general fund every year towards your capital improvement. As it sits right now, your unfunded new construction projects is about $75 million. So here's a breakdown of your general fund capital projects for next year. Comes in just under the $2 million mark. And we're only going to go over year one today.
Ms. Petito, I just wanted to point out the Carver Center apparently was painted interior-wise last week by PAL.
I think the gymnasium, just the gymnasium had been painted. I don't know that the
Yeah, I would
entire.
just check with that because it looks like they're kind of.
I know they had done some, we were out there, I think a couple weeks ago to take a look at the gymnasium floor. I know that the PAL director had worked with Home Depot to get some donated material, and then I think he may have used inmate labor to do some of the painting inside. They've also offered to help do some exterior work. We can double check on that, and if possible, we can take it off, we can swap it out with another project. So thanks for.
Yeah, just.
I'm surprised on the HVAC replacement, various facilities, that it's not more than 75,000, but whatever you say.
Every year, we budget 75,000. They're on a schedule over that life cycle. You'll see some that'll pop up in here that are like your bigger units, like your.
That's what I'm thinking.
Your chiller
Just my
plants and
church
some
is
of
like
those.
that per year.
Yeah, these are more of, they're commercial units, but they're more like of a residential size, community centers, things like that, where they are smaller. And then here's a look at some of your other capital projects from other funding sources. Might be impact fees, it might be vessel registration or DRI funds.
The
But-
Pacific Arena is the
That's the
fairgrounds.
fairgrounds. So the total CIP is going to be about 3.5 million. That doesn't include if we have to modify this because we find out that we get the legislative appropriations. We'll have to come back and modify this. As it sits right now, we didn't include them.
Okay.
And then we're going to talk a little bit about our rolling stock. We did start the lease program for vehicle replacement back in fiscal year 23 or last year. We were able to kind of level out the budget there, reduce some of those maintenance costs. As it sits right now, I think we have 41 vehicles under the lease. We are evaluating that plan and looking at ways of creating an internal service fund that supports your rolling stock replacement, more like a pooled car access, where you have some departments that maybe don't need a permanent car assigned. We're trying to come up with a pooled model. But then it also includes your specialized or large equipment purchases. Earlier today, you allowed us to replace one of the ambulances. We did have 3 that were scheduled to get done next year. We did expedite one of the units because of the availability. So you'll see that in here on your general fund departments. On average, we spend about $2 million in general fund on your rolling stock and equipment replacement. And then here's a look at our employee health insurance fund. This does show an increase of about 13%. We had discussed that with you previously at a workshop dedicated just to the benefits. And then this is our risk fund. This fund was established last year in an effort to combat the rising property insurance costs. This is to cover our buildings that have a value of $1 million or less, and then it would be self-funded if there were any claims. So the goal with that is to increase this fund up to at least $1 million, just so we have that, and then we'll just replenish it as needed if we have any claims. This is a look at your road and bridge division. On the operational side, it's up about 10%. Reserves are growing by about 45%. The combined increase is 22%. This department or division did provide 3 different decision units. 2 of those we were able to fund out of the existing budgets that exist today. There's one that's still pending. It's for a rebuild on a motor grader, which is an expensive piece of equipment. So we're still working with the departments on their decision units. This is a look at the tourist development projects. As you know, it's made up of 5 pennies or 5%. This particular one receives 20% of the allocation. The large reserve is for capital projects, which include the grants that are provided to local governments. Most recently, it was provided to the City of Palm Coast for their pickleball expansion or their Southern Rec Center. It also holds an amount, local match for the Eco Discovery Center. This is also tourist development. This fund receives 60% of their allocation or collection. The operating side with personnel only increased about 160,000. The rest is going into reserves. And then you've got your beach restoration project. This receives 20% of the fund. You've got a large amount in there for reserves. I know that earlier when we were talking about the beaches, talked about possibly using some of this money. Internally, when we've looked at it, we've looked at using this funding to maybe supplement or augment the other features that go hand in hand with the beach. It might be for the replacement of dune walkovers or parking improvements, things like that. So that way we have a dedicated source moving forward.
Accessibility.
Accessibility issues, Moby mats, things like that. Rather than putting it into the sand, putting it into the amenities and features that supplement the beach use.
Also, last year, didn't we approve that this fund, just this part of the tourist fund, this 1111, you can go get that money without coming back to the board for a special approval?
That's correct.
We did something.
Last year.
Is that right? Yeah. So it's a little different than the other funds as to who can approve usage.
Correct. And then this is a look at your municipal services. This is for your planning and zoning as well as code enforcement. We did have some operational costs increasing slightly, and that's primarily with the anticipation of the use of a special magistrate for code cases. These costs should be offset, though, by the fines or fees that are imposed on those code cases. And then they also had a decision unit to fund a vehicle for their new code enforcement officer. We were able to accomplish that this year, just using leased vehicle.
Do we have a mechanism with that magistrate to enforce if he levies a fine that will help us in this area?
It should, yes. It's his costs, whatever his costs are. We're trying to come up with a fee structure that would support whatever he levies would pay for himself. So it's not costing us money. It basically would fund itself.
But with the magistrate, we'll have a mechanism to collect that money, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
I think actually starting this week, we would get a lien, right, and levy it, but I think he starts this week, is it?
Yes.
This week he starts. This is a look at the building department fund. The operational side increased by 4%, but overall the fund has gone up, or I'm sorry, decreased by 13%. This is the E911 or emergency communications. This is based on the charge per phone line that you pay on your phone bills. There has been considerable movement in this fund. Overall, it's decreased about 15%. This is your IT replacement fund. This is another new fund. It was established last year for your IT replacement. Has an increase of 24%. Your public safety communications network. This fund is for our radio system. We hold back annual debt service amount in our reserves, so you'll see that going up. Overall, the fund went up by 10%. This is one that we adjusted last year with the fees for the radios. This is your Daytona North Service District. I know that we have had discussions about this fund already. We do have some additional work to complete and come back to you. We talked about it when we were looking at our roads. Tentatively, we're showing it staying the same. But I do recognize that we need to come back and finalize it. It is one of your non-general fund departments, so we threw it in here today. But we do have some time before we finalize this. This is a look at your airport fund. You've got your reserves growing there by about 800,000. Overall, this is increased of 21%. This is a look at your residential solid waste. This is for your Waste Pro contract. The funding gets levied as part of that assessment for garbage collection in your unincorporated area.
What are the reserves for, if it's a pass-through?
You have to hold back 3 months. You have 3 months due to the lag time of the contract is calendar year, your taxes, or our fiscal year is not run by calendar year, so you have a few months. This is your SHIP, your State Housing Initiative Partnership Program. Overall, it's got a decrease of 27, almost 28%.
That's straight state funding, right?
Correct.
I have a quick question, but Matt's not here. So what is the, I know that the IT increase is due to a drone purchase. Is that it? Are you familiar with it? Maybe I'll just ask you outside of here.
I can look it up. I don't
That's
know
okay.
of a new drone purchase. I know we had the big one last year.
Yeah, I saw a drone purchase it looked like this year. That's what I was going to ask about. But
It
that's
might
okay.
be some of the smaller ones, but we can definitely get together after this. This is your court technology fund. The revenues generated from court doc stamps, and they're used to support court technology. It's part of Article 5. Internally, we work with these individual agencies and identify how the money is going to be spent. And then the reserves will build up over time to cover any large projects that you have. And then this is your law and legal fund, showing your legal aid, law enforcement trust funds, law library, and then court facilities. And then this is just a continuation of some of those law and legal funds. Domestic violence trust, the alcohol and drug abuse, juvenile diversion, crime prevention, court innovation, and then teen court.
What determines those levels?
You have ticket surcharges, forfeiture, seizures, fees imposed by court. They make up the funding for these different accounts. So depending
None
on.
of that's ad valorem?
No, these are all non-ad valorem, non-general fund.
Thank you.
And then this is a look at your special assessment funds. So some of these cover mosquito control. Your North Malacomper drainage is the maintenance. And then Bimini Gardens covers road work within that area. It's similar to Daytona North. And then these are your new recreation impact fees, as well as the library trust impact fee. So you got small amounts sitting in those. Here's a look at your old recreation impact fees. So we're trying to use those up first if we have projects in those zones. And then you've got a series of transportation impact fees, old and new. And those are restricted for capacity improvements on your roads within those certain districts or areas.
So we expect those reserves just to grow because there's not enough there to do much. Yep.
Correct,
Correct? Yeah.
correct.
Okay.
And then these are your public safety impact fees.
I think, are these the ones discussed in the budget this year with the sheriffs?
Correct. He had mentioned the amount of reserves in the law enforcement one. They can only be used for capacity improvement. So if you're adding deputies, it can only go towards the expense, the capital expense of maybe the vehicle or computer, something capital in nature. It could also continue to grow here and could fund maybe a future expansion or construction of.
So he's, it sounds like he's asking that we release it towards the budget. Is that what he's asking? Or
He had mentioned it as a potential offset, I think, of some of that capital as far as the vehicles go. But I think he leases the vehicles. I don't think that you can use it towards a lease. I think you have to buy an asset and not lease it.
I'm sorry to stop on this. That was implemented, what, 2022? The impact fee, and when would it be up for like a review of adjustment?
I think when it came out, I thought that it was either 4 or 6 years. No, 4. I got 4 fingers. 4 every 4 years.
2026,
Correct.
when we look at it again. Okay. Yeah. So I think that is what he's asking is or indicating in here is that he's saying, perhaps you want to look at that to release it, but you're saying we typically hold back, so this could be used for something like jail improvement, what, like, just to refresh my,
It says law enforcement. I'd have
Yeah.
to look and see. I mean, if you were going to, not that they need it right now, but if you were going to add a wing to his new operations center, it could fund that. If you were to build or open up another, what do they call that one in Palm Coast? A substation or another location, it could fund that. It's typically like a capital improvement.
yeah, he's saying here, it's recommendation that it be used to offset equipment and capital costs associated with the growth required. um,
If they
The
lease,
deputies added to the growth, so new cars, that's what he's mentioning here.
yeah, it
Just,
could only go towards capital. So I don't know if a leased vehicle counts as capital because you're not owning it.
Right.
It would be good to, put it towards something that appreciates, not depreciates. But certainly it's whatever the board decides to do with that. It is an option. And then this is a look at your landfill funds. Really don't have a lot of revenue coming into these. You do have some reserves. There is a decision unit to add employees to the Household Hazardous Waste Recycling Center. You may recall, we used to get a grant through the state, but with the population or change in population, we no longer get that grant. So we don't charge for that fee for people to bring their chemicals or paint, used oil into the facility. So it doesn't really have any revenue coming in. It's going to be kind of hard to add more to this if we either don't supplement it through some other revenue stream, whether it's the general fund or if we start charging now to have people drop off their waste. Most communities that run that type of facility, they do charge. There is a nominal fee that gets charged. But if we were to do that, it would require us to possibly get a scale out there. The scale that had been out there had been removed because it no longer worked. I think it had gotten struck by lightning a number of years ago. You'd have to make some sort of an investment in that property if we're going to start collecting fees. In addition, you'd have to add staff to be able to collect the fees. I think they've seen an uptick in the amount of stuff coming in. The city of Palm Coast used to have in their previous contract where you could do curbside residential household hazardous waste pickup. They've since stopped that, and they suggest to the community to go here. So there is an uptick in the amount of people that have been coming out there. But again, we don't charge anything for the service.
So I'm just going to ask, can we get a number of what it would cost to improve it so that we could look at implementing a fee charge? I mean, what is this? Do we know what would it cost to improve if we had to roll to that model?
We'd have to put something together. I don't
mean,
know the number off the top of my
You
head.
could just charge a standard fee. Anybody who goes there, it's $5. And then you wouldn't have to put a scale in, and you would have some income coming in because the people in Palm Coast, we're
Like a flat
funding the
fee?
whole thing. So they don't provide that service.
You could come up with some sort of a cost method. I don't know if it's the same for everything, but if you bring one tire, is it the same as bringing 4 or 5 tires?
I know,
So I think
but putting the scale in and extra people is going to be pretty expensive. And so just as a test, say for a year, you could just do a standard $5, $10 per visit.
we can certainly explore some ideas and
Because
options.
there's a limit now. It's not you can't put a big dump truck in there.
Correct.
It's like a pickup truck size thing.
Correct. Most places, they weigh whatever the weight is because the hauler that takes it away from here, typically they go by weight or
But we're
quantity.
not doing it at all right now, is what I'm saying.
Correct.
You could get some income just by doing a standard fee.
We just need to make sure that we can kind of validate how we got there so that it doesn't come across as price gouging. is my only concern. So I think we're going to have to just do a little bit of homework on the easiest way without having as much of an improvement in cost of putting in a scale.
It's going to cost a lot.
Then the downside is, even if it's a nominal fee, is people not recycling hazardous material.
Yeah, throw them in the trash.
Yeah, we want to encourage the recycling of hazardous materials. I've been out there many times, and it's cars. It's just trucks and pickups and
Yeah.
stuff, bringing in a couple cans of paint
Right.
and
Yeah.
fluorescent bulbs and stuff, and we don't want that going in the landfill,
No,
the
we-
trash.
We don't, and right now you only have 2 staff members that are out there, so in addition to running the site, they get overrun with people coming out there that they now don't have time to mow and to take care of the property, mend the fence, and do other improvements that we're responsible for. That's why it originally came in as, hey, can we just maybe get 2 people out here to mow the grass and do some of these site improvements, because we've got, 3 or 4 locations that we're responsible for.
So the money we do get, that's from the state, that's for landfill monitoring, correct?
We don't
Don't
get
we
any
have-
money anymore. We used to get that grant.
We don't get any, didn't we
No.
just get it last year?
I don't recall when it went away. It was based on the population change and some language. I think it might have been a couple years now that we've been without it.
But Palm Coast residents do pay county taxes, so they, just because the city doesn't offer that service, they do pay for it.
Well, I'm trying to come up with a way to make it even for the people, everybody who uses it.
Charging a user fee or something, if that helps encourage more usage and makes us whole on our expenses, I understand that, I guess.
So we're looking at adding 1 to 2 FTEs.
Yeah, the ask was for 2. Right now, like I said, you only have 2 employees that work out there. So when you think about the different locations that they're responsible for, trying to factor in vacation or leave, or if they call out sick, it doesn't give you a lot of capacity.
So the 91,000, is that the total per FTE?
That would be adding, I believe, the 2 people to cut the
Including their
grass.
pension and everything, medical?
It's not a high-paying position, so
Wow,
it's,
terrible. Understood.
this is a look at your debt service funds. A lot of these retire in 2032, I believe.
So that's our total debt?
That is most of it. I don't know. You still have some debt, I think, at the airport that might not be showing up on this slide.
It showed up on the other
You
one.
showed it up.
It
on
showed
the
up on
air-
the
yeah.
airport
Can
itself.
you just put these into normal language so we know what they were for?
I probably am going to need finance to come up. I know that the Justice Center was probably, that's probably the easiest one. We'll get Brian to let us know.
You said most of these are done in 32?
I believe it's 2032 is the expiration.
Brian Egginger, Financial Services. So Justice Center, that's the courthouse. Capital improvement was to build this complex, and when it was refinanced, it also incorporated the jail expansion. The taxable special assessment is the Paintersville Seawall District. The capital improvement revenue note series 2020 is the new Sheriff's Operations Center. And the last one is ESL for, I believe it was maybe Pellershire property, but I can get you the details on that one.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thanks.
And then this is a look at the Neighborhood Stabilization Program 3. Here's a look at your environmentally sensitive lands. Small amounts. Whoops. Jumped over a couple. This is your utility authority and economic opportunity. This is more of your grants. Total of 648,000 for next year.
Right.
Bless you. Constitutional fuel tax.
The grants, that doesn't include SCOP and SCRAP? We don't include that?
We don't include them until we have a grant agreement. So typically, we end up having to bring those forward to you. They're not part of the initial budget because we typically get those agreements closer to the start date of those projects. It's in the 5-year work plan, but we don't recognize them until they actually get funded at the state
Yep.
level.
That makes sense. Thank you.
This is a fund that has been used for local match on road projects. There really isn't any money coming into this. We do have some sitting in reserves that we would continue to hold for future road projects. And then this is a look at your beachfront parks. These are tied to the DRI. One is for maintenance and then one is for capital improvement. This is your half-cent discretionary sales tax. You've got about 3 million that gets transferred out to augment the sheriff's operations for the jail. And then we do have some pledge for capital improvement. And then we've got the upcoming workshop on June 10th. We've got the constitutionals coming. And then followed on the 17th of June will be your general fund departments. I did talk to the clerk's office last week, and I know that they will be at a conference. They've got their annual conference on the 10th. I was going to share with them the presentation to see if they had any concerns with what we were presenting, but there won't be anybody here from the clerk's office on the 10th. So if you have any questions or follow-up, we'll have to handle that on the 17th.
What time is it on the 10th?
Let me take a look.
I don't have it in front of me, I'm sorry.
Should be at 1 o'clock, 1 p.m.
Okay.
And that concludes the non-general fund departments. I don't know if anybody has any questions.
Any questions?
Asked them.
Okay. I know I would like some time just to review in some of the details. I'll have a few questions, but if we can set up a separate appointment just to go over some of those questions, that would be helpful to me.
Absolutely. I think Brian may have sent out on, I don't know if it was Thursday or Friday, some of the backup documents that kind of go through more of the detail. This is just a rolled up version rather than going line item by line item. But if anybody has any questions, be happy to meet with you and answer those.
All right, so the next time we will get together for budgets in a week. So we've got the next few Mondays busy. There was a lot of follow-up from today's beach nourishment discussion. So it looks like next, even though we're meeting for a budget workshop with the constitutionals at 1, how do you see us getting together? Do we need to get together before lunch and then come back at 1? Or just follow up after the constitutionals with any additional material you've got from the beach nourishment?
However you prefer to handle it, we can certainly do it after the constitutionals. I don't think that the constitutionals
Let's do
budget's going
that
to take
then.
too long.
Just make sure we get it noticed.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Anything else? Other than that, we're adjourned from the workshop. Thank you very much. Is there public comment? Let me keep it before we adjourn. No public, nobody addressed coming forward. So again, we'll adjourn. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Very good.